Good morning.
Yeah, good afternoon from England.
Yes.
Good evening, Kurdistan. Yes.
Yeah.
Different times.
Different time zones. Yes.
Yes. Probably different weather as well. A very cold day in England.
It's pretty sunny here, but I feel bad saying that when I know how little sunshine there is in England.
Yeah, you should. We're really angry with you.
My heart still lives in Kurdistan, so like I'm wearing like shirts, short sleeve
We're
shirts.
all in Kurdistan in our minds.
But it's very cold in Kurdistan at this time too.
Yes, it
very
is.
often.
Yes.
But there's some.
Those are sometimes my favorite pictures of Slimani, when the hills are all covered with snow.
Yes.
And then you know that Hauraman is really beautiful.
The first time I went to Kurdistan was in the winter, and there was about a meter of snow, but I still saw an orange tree, I think it was, still covered in fruits. It was amazing.
Wow.
That's a pretty good metaphor for Kurdistan too.
It is.
It struck me a lot at the time.
Really,
yeah,
I bet. That's beautiful, Christine.
Well, it was just after the what we would call the first Gulf War in the West, and so a lot of people didn't have windows that closed properly, and people were very uncomfortable and cold. I was very struck by that as well.
Yeah. Christine, when were you in Kurdistan? Wait, we'll get started in just 1 second. We're just letting everyone come in, and I kind of want to hear the story.
Well, the first time I went to Kurdistan was in 1992. So we went in, I think, about January, and it was in the entourage of a British politician called Geoffrey Archer, who was later disgraced, but who was very interested in doing good work for the Kurds at the time. And so I sort of, I and a couple of other academics jumped on the coattails of some journalists who were going with him. And so it was a bit of a crazy circus, actually. But it was my first opportunity to go to Kurdistan and you know, sort of jump off that bandwagon a little bit and meet some people. So it was, yes, it was quite an amazing trip in a lot of ways.
It sounds like it. I hadn't been aware of the political angle, how you got there at that time. I knew it was a unique time that you went, but I didn't know how it all worked.
Yes, well, I had been going to do field work in Georgia, actually, with Kurdish speakers there, but they had an uprising against Mr. Gamsa Kurdia. So then I ended up coming and doing my field work with Yazidis in the Dohuk region instead, which is, I've always been very pleased that things worked out that way, and I got to the Caucasus later. So yeah, it's all good. Yeah. Yes.
Wonderful. So, well, should we get started?
Yeah, I think so. I think we should. I would like to welcome everybody who's joined us so far, and a big warm welcome from California and England and Kurdistan. My name is Christine Robbins, and I'm speaking to you from Exeter. I work at the University of Exeter in the Centre for Kurdish Studies.
And my name is Marie Labras. I work at Kashkool, the Center for Arts and Culture at the American University of Iraq, where I also teach.
Now, this is the second of our conversations on the theme of curating Kurdishness, art, culture, and the archive in Kurdistan and beyond. And it's quite an unwieldy title because we are aiming to capture a huge range of creativity, of making new expressions of knowledge and of preserving older treasured knowledge as well. And we see this happening among people who are living in Kurdistan and people who are coming from Kurdistan. So we'll be talking about poetry, art, sculpture, and also about how people curate and preserve their own precious cultural knowledge. And our guests will include creatives, scholars, and artists of all ages from different communities who use a number of different languages. I should tell you a little bit about Exeter's Centre for Kurdish Studies, which was founded in 2006. It's actually part of the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies, which is the UK's largest single multidisciplinary department focusing on the Middle East. And since 2006, through our MA and PhD programs, we've seen the emergence of some young scholars who've really been changing the paradigms in Kurdish studies, including our very own Dr. Marie Labrosse, but also Dr. Deniz Ekici, Dr. Mari Rostami. I'm trying to say different people every week because there are so many of them. And they've done so much to change the paradigms of Kurdish studies. And we still have people doing great PhDs with us now. As from 2021, we'll be offering once again our MA in Kurdish Studies. In fact, it's a brand new one this time, and that will offer the chance to engage with a huge range of Kurdish sources. Students will be able to develop their own research interests as well through guided and independent readings, presentations, creative project work, and of course through their extended dissertation. And we're offering a number of scholarships as well, and we have details of all of this on our website. Now, on the research side, in our centre, we're also quite busy. My colleagues, Dr. Clémence Scalbert-Yücel and Dr. Ferangis Khaderi, have been very active in working on the preservation of knowledge and culture through oral history, endangered cultures, lost literatures, and also translating Kurdish texts for a non-Kurdish speaking public, and most recently, archives and decolonised archival processes. So this idea of for conversations came from our celebrating Kurdish culture, and on the one hand, and the possibilities for young people to follow their interests, their talents and their passions into graduate studies and also into lifetime careers.
And this is exactly the work that Kashkool loves to do, that we formed Kashkool to do, to support emerging and established artists, translators, and researchers. Over the last 5 years, we've translated over 1,000 pages of Kurdish poetry into English, placing these publications in respected literary outlets such as World Literature Today, Poetry, Modern Poetry and Translation, Poetry London, Words Without Borders, Poetry Daily, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and many others. We work as a collaborative. We're quite a small organization, but we work as a collaborative and magnify each other's work quite well, I think. Each semester in non-COVID times, we welcome artists and researchers and residents from around the world, as well as interns. So keep your eyes open for when we come back to a full in-person staff. We would love to see you visit our office and talk with you about working with us. Our current research projects include the collecting, editing, and selected translations of Peter Maird's prose. We do that project in collaboration with Gene Archive. And then we also have an upcoming project that we're very excited about, moving our oral history project from Mosul into Shingal as well, looking specifically at the lifetime histories of the epic storytellers in the community. We're really excited about that. Partners obviously include the University of Exeter, as well as Royal Holloway University London, the University of California, Los Angeles, Oxford, Southampton, and of course, Gene Archive in Slimani. Please feel free to reach out to our assistant director who's monitoring our chat today. His name is Sarwar Taha. If you have any questions about the organization or any ideas for getting involved, he's your guy. We are absolutely thrilled to host today's conversation with Briar Bajalan, a writer, translator, and researcher who has transformed his personal history of forced Arabization into many occasions for cross-cultural understanding and fluency. Briar graduated from AUIS with a degree in engineering. Kashkool was very happy to steal him away for a career in the humanities. together with Dr. Elizabeth Campbell and the Digital Libraries Program at UCLA, then known as the Digital Ephemera Project, we founded Mosul Lives, which is now the second largest database for oral history in the Middle East. We founded this database very much with the idea that Mosul was a city that was, that in many people's eyes was destroyed, and in our eyes was very much alive. And we were looking for ways to help Moslawis remember what they loved about their city before the occupation, specifically to help them rebuild. So rebuilding is more than just bricks and mortar. It's about how to rebuild up here and in the imagination. So Briar was instrumental in running that project with us and conceiving of that project as really a love letter to the city and an attempt to contribute to the rebuilding exercise there. So we're very grateful that Briar was part of that team. Elizabeth and I at the time told Briar that we hoped his work in Mosul would serve him in his graduate studies as a unique database, and it absolutely did. I knew Briar would find the support he deserved at Exeter because the faculty there are fundamentally interdisciplinary, excited about digital archives, and they see literature without question as socially relevant, which I knew would be the exact right approach for Briar. This past year, he finished his MA in Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Exeter and was invited to stay on for a PhD. I cannot wait to introduce you soon, Briar, as Dr. Briar Bajalan. It will be very exciting for me. And I'll turn over the rest of your introduction to Christine.
Yes, although Briar has only been here for about 18 months, he's had huge academic success. He won the Glencairn Balfour Prize for the best MA dissertation, and he also won a very competitive scholarship for a PhD, which he's just begun. He's also made a really great contribution to our research and learning culture. It turns out he's been an unofficial mentor to some of our undergraduate students who can't speak too highly of him. They love him to bits. And he's participated in our strategic discussions about research and resources here in the Centre for Kurdish Studies and more widely in the field of Arabic literature too. So he's drawing on a really wide range of skills and experience in cultural research, literature, poetry, translation, and archives. So today I'm curious to ask him a bit more about those experiences that have formed him. So now we're going to hear from Briar. I'm going to start the conversation with some questions. Briar, your family comes from near Khanaqin in Kurdistan of Iraq, but they were forcibly resettled. And in the end, you grew up in Baghdad, rather far from your roots. But you've actually said that this loss became a gift that you used later in your research and creative work. Can you tell us why you said that?
Yeah, so my family, I faced forced Arabization, and we then we had to sit in camps, but we ran away to Baghdad, where some of our relatives are there. And then we lived in Baghdad illegally without having residency card or anything. I even was under the risk of growing up without education because none of the schools were accepting us. So my father has to work and of course, my mother was a teacher, but she lost her job because of the first Arabization too. And so my father had to work 3 jobs at a time to provide basically bribe for the soldiers or for the officials to let us go to school and all this stuff. And one of the interesting things is that my father was one of his jobs was in the shoe factory in Baghdad, in Al-Mutanabbi Street, which is a street it's not an ordinary street, but it's like a cultural hub for Iraqi musicians, poets, and intellectuals. And especially in the 19th century, there is still the old cafes in Baghdad that dates back to that time, where poets sit there and recited their poems in front of everyone, and sometimes did a poetry fight between each other. And it was a bazaar for selling books too. So and my father was very interested in classical Arabic poetry and Arabic poetry. So I had asthma when I was a kid, so I couldn't go out and play with other kids my age. So I spent all of my time reading classical poetry, and especially the poets that I'm interested in now. I'm doing research about is Zahawi and Rusafi, and basically 19th century, 20th century Iraqi poets. Um, and and instead of any resentments that might be caused because of the forced Arabization, I learned to love Arabic literature and love Arabic language, and transfer that into a gift. But also one another and be fluent in Arabic language, and not only fluent in language, but one of the most important things is that being fluent into cultures, because I had access, unlike my Kurdish friends, I had access to travel to other cities in Iraq, like Samarra, Najaf, I don't know, Mosul. I had a lot of travels to Mosul. So basically, I had that access, which created in me the love of culture and the love of embarrassing cultures, and basically love it without reacting against it.
That is very interesting, because many people do not get love out of a situation like that. And I'm wondering if that's, was it because there was a lot of love and feelings of belonging in your family that helped you do that?
Actually, there's a lot of things that contributed into that. First, like my family always helped me to transcend the bitterness into seeing the beauty of what we have got, and that comes out of like really small things. For example, there was this park in Baghdad that that was used for by the Saddam regime to show his force, to show his military, to show. He used that park basically as a propaganda for his regime. But that was one of the parks that we had most of the fun in Baghdad in. I mean, we used that place to give it our own voice in it. It was basically a free park, and so we spend all of our time of gatherings and most of our fun times in there. And one of the other thing is that the people I met in Baghdad, I mean, in school, I was discriminated because because I'm Kurd, and I remember once my principal of the school beated me just for the fact that she told me stupid Kurd, and then my family raised me in a way that told me, like, as a kid, if someone says a bad word to you, then don't answer them because it will rotate and go back to themselves. And I just said that to her, and I remember like she had a small switch in her hand, but she refused to beat me with that, and she decided to take me to her office and picking a thicker one and beat me with that. And when I returned to the classroom, and of course, most of the teachers didn't like her too, because she was a very Baptist principal. But when I returned back to the classroom, I had like a very nice teacher. She took me to her home. She let me play with her kids and actually cooked for me at that time. And she told me, she said, if you want to embarrass her at the end of the year, you have to force her to you have to be get good grades, so that you force her to give you a gift or appreciate your your existence. I mean, so this is the one of the people that I met in Baghdad, and these are the stories that really made me today.
Mm, mm. Thank you. Well, I think I'm going to have to hand you over to Marie to ask a question now, but I don't know if you've noticed, Briar, but the comments, in the comments, there's a ferocious competition going on between whether people in Exeter love you more or people in Suleimani. And it seems to be like a kind of a draw at the moment, but we'll see how that evolves as the conversation goes on.
I was about to say, I think Doha and Coventry might be trying to join the fight too.
Yeah.
Briar, I knowing your parents, it's wonderful to hear these stories and difficult too. You told me at one point that your dad was working 2 jobs and then would still come home, and in the 4 hours that he had of being awake, that he should have been spending sleeping, he would spend them with you and your brother, taking you guys out, showing you the bazaar, showing you the bookstores, getting an ice cream cone, even when that might not have been entirely legal. And I can see what you're saying, that the little things helped you rescue those things, helped you answer people like that principal with a different kind of strength that I still see in you today when we work at Mosul. We've often talked about the disciplines we work in together, Briar, oral history, anthropology, translation, as opportunities to confront colonialism, pseudo-colonialism, racism, and however subtle a form. And I wondered if you would talk a little bit about how you see those fields that you conduct research in as fields of empowerment for yourself as an Iraqi, as a Kurd, and for others. I'm interested in how you see those fields upending the sort of traditional power dynamics we see.
Yeah, we talked about this a lot. I'm just gonna first talk about the importance for me, and then for the other people that we work together with. The importance of writing and these collaborative works that we have done, for me, was like revealed really very much when my wife's community was attacked by missiles launched by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard into their community that is based in Koya in Iraq. And it was a very strange time where I couldn't say anything, and I just checked my wife, like just looking for her on her phone or on the computer, just searching for places that talked about it, and basically like nowhere talked about this event. And she told me with frustration, she said like, so my dad died and he's gone in vain, and no one talked about it. And it was a time where, sorry.
Take your time.
Where good friends comes. Sorry, excuse my emotions. So,
Briar, I think it's safe to say that everyone in this meeting is very much with you. Take your time and speak about what you'd like, and speak about what you need to, and don't speak about what you need to take some time with too. Either way is okay.
So it was the time where all my friends in Kashkool and everyone that I worked with and loved came to support me. And I told everyone that the place might be dangerous and you don't need to come, and we could be hit by another missile anytime, but like everyone showed up. In my kind of my head was telling me to tell you don't come, but my heart was begging for you to come to at that moment. And then David and I, um, David Shook, an amazing writer and or artist in residence at Kashkool at that time. We came together and wrote about this event, and wrote in a way that is very artistic. We wrote about an installation that were made by by a local artist in that community. Um, Bayan Sohrabi and
Shoresh
Shoresh Ahi. Yeah. They did an installation and they used all the materials from the bombing into their artwork. They bandaged some of the trees that were burned by the missile attack, and all these nice installations and murals that were made by using the distraction that was made by the missiles. And so David came with me and we went to that place. It was kind of like a therapy too, like going to that place and seeing the walls. There was still the blood of my family member into that wall, where they could like just peel pieces of meat on the wall at that time. It was a big therapy for me to see all of these, and basically having David there and risking getting a diarrhea and eating chicken because he's a vegetarian, so he ate chicken with me so that he makes me feel better. And this is the kind of friends you get from such collaborative works. And on the way back, he recited a poem for me, written by Neruda, and I felt very close to that poem, and so I translated it, and that led into we read that poem in poetry evening in Amna Suraka, which is one of the major and most brutal prison, Saddam prison in Suleimania.
I think you're sort of leading into the next question that we had for you, which was how you became a translator. Was that the first time that you were translating poetry?
No, it wasn't the first time. Basically, the first time translation was a reason for me to meet and date my wife.
All is revealed.
She's a trilingual too, and she speaks Persian and Kurdish and English too. So so when we met at the beginning, we were friends and just friends. So we used to translate poems for each other. I was interested to learn more about Persian poetry, so we used to sit with each other and translate poems orally as we go. And I think that was the first time we translated poems. And I participated in some poetry slam at the American University, and also professionally, I started translation with Professor Alana Murray. And
so what did working with Kashkool bring to your kind of understanding of translation?
Working with Kashkool, it told me about the importance of collaborative work into translation, and the importance of coming together and discuss one line of poetry and spend thousands of hours, like hundreds of hours on just one line of poem. And sometimes we get into fights, and I mean intellectual fights. But translation with Kashkool I don't know, it's hard to describe, but like it's going through thousands of archives and works and readings before even doing that translation. So when we translated Jamil Silki Zahawi with Alana, when we came up with like terrible translation, then we would say to each other, oh, no, no, this is not Zahawi. So we know who is Zahawi. We know the personality of Zahawi. We know who is this guy, how he looks like, through studying all this like secondary sources and or archives and everything. So we knew who that person is, even if they are not alive today with us, but we know who they are.
Briar and I always used to call it, we have to make the right mess. So we would, our first translation would be what people call thick translation, where it would just be like tons of notes, tons of references. And Jamil al-Zahawi, people think of him as a very secular poet, and he was, but he was also really referencing the religious traditions too. And so it's sort of a game of how he's pulling from the religious tradition of Islam, but also how he's pulling from the newness of secular culture. So so there would be terrible messes. And then we would be like, all right, this is the shadow of the man. We need the reader to meet the man himself. How do we do that? Yeah. And that was our process. Briar, before I ask you to share some of these, oh wait, we're not there yet. Christine, may I ask one more question on where we are?
Oh yeah, please do.
Sorry, I just wanted to add the importance of this collaborative work also to other people. Sorry, one of the most important things that that was important for me from this collaborative and empowered me is that visiting Baghdad again after the war, the work that I did in translation and the work I did in Kashkool, or empowered me to visit Baghdad again in 2018. It was the first time visiting Baghdad from 2004. We left Baghdad at that time, and I've never been back there because of the war. And poetry and translation brought me back again to Baghdad, and not with empty hands, but with a project to preserve a record of the Al-Zahawi Cafe in Baghdad and do a poetry film about it. A cafe that is very much neglected now, that dates back to the 1900s. So this is kind of the projects that comes out of this collaborative work.
Wonderful, thank you. Marie? Alana Marie, there are questions about this in the she has both names. Yeah, I don't know which one is your nom de guerre, but
use whichever one, or just, hey, so-and-so, and it'll be fine.
Yeah.
Briar, I love these stories you're telling about, poetry giving you something to bring back to Baghdad, and translation giving you something to bring back to Baghdad. You didn't come back to Baghdad with empty hands. And I of course love and mourn the story of how we all came together after the attacks in Koya. And I remember that time, of course, quite clearly. And I remember talking with you a lot about how to respond, that we wanted to say something, but it was very important to you to say something as an artist, artistically, not just to let the rage and grief you felt govern you, but to really choose an artistic path. And I wonder if you might, was that part of how you were and are conceptualizing empowerment, where your power comes from as a human?
I think so, because as I told you, from my childhood, it was art, it was poetry that helped me to transform that lose into a gift. And And when I saw Shorosh Ahi and Bayan Sohrabi doing these artworks there, I kind of felt like this is the way again to transfer that lose into gift.
And would you tell us just a little bit about one of my favorite parts of that story as you and David tell it, is the interviewing the Peshmerga who were on site, clearing the site, trying to, I mean, it was a community center that was hit. It wasn't a military installation. It was, there were libraries and meeting rooms, and the community really needed the building back. And so there was a lot of immediate effort to get the building rehabilitated. And would you tell us a little bit about how the Peshmerga who were on site reacted to Shoresh and Bayan, reacted to you and David coming into that space?
I think it was a relief for the Peshmergas too, because that kind of humor that David has, and so we made a lot of fun in that certain place. I don't know how, but it came out. There was a guy named Haji Gulawi, Mr. Haji Flower. And he was he had a flower on his shirt, on his Kurdish clothes. And I remember we made a lot of jokes about Haji Gulawi, and we also made jokes about cigarettes because the Peshmergas gave cigarettes to David, and David said that you guys have a bad influence on me. And the guy said, oh, this is Marlboro. It's made in America. You guys have a bad influence on us. So these are like some of the moments where kind of we transform that tragedy into a gift, or I don't know. But also like the community and the Peshmergas, they wanted that place back. So but that didn't stop the artist Shorshahi to perform his work. He knew that his work, or their work, is not might not be consistent, might not still be there as they rebuild the building, but they still made it and still try to give their voices out.
I've always loved that they accepted the transient nature, that the art was there to help reclaim the space. Yeah, I've always loved that too, Briar.
And it was very important work of art, because the kind of art work that is mixed with the building, that goes inside the building, goes inside the walls, and how the bodies are connected with the walls. It means a lot, because all the wall became a piece of art. Everything was so all like the bodies of people were mixed with the wall, or united with the wall. And one of the artwork that he did, painting a mural on the wall, and he kind of mixed a crack in the wall with a crack in the body of two of the feminist activists who died in that attack, who were also cut from that position. So the crack in the wall is in a way, in an artistic way, combined with the cut of the actual bodies. I don't know if I'm making sense. So.
Yes, you are making sense, always. So Marie, do you think we should ask Briar to share a poem with us today? Share some poems?
I think that would be absolutely lovely. And Christine and I are very excited about these poems because they, a few of them, I think, have just come out in publication with the rest of us. I don't have a link to that publication right now ready to paste into the chat. But please try and track it down. The Rest of Us, Stories from Students of the Global Majority at the University of Exeter. We're so proud of you, Briar, for that. Yeah, I think it'd be lovely to hear some poems.
So as we talk also about the empowerment of others through this collaborative work, one of David and I co-translated for As-Sadiq Al-Radi, who's a major Sudani poet living in London now, and of course seeking asylum seeker now in the UK after his life was threatened in Sudan. And in one instance, he told me how he felt alone here in the UK, where he couldn't speak the language, he couldn't interact with people, and also like he had a house overlooking the train line in London, the train station. So he usually would go into the window of his house and basically imagine a conversation with him and the workers who come to fix the train line. And that was a way to, he just made up this conversation with these people. He brought his tea and talked with them beyond the window. And at that time when David and I worked with Sadiq, it was very important to speak to Sadiq, at least for me, like speaking to him in Arabic and basically translating his work or his poems into English. I think that was an amazing work for Sadiq also to bring his voice out. So I will read this poem in Arabic. I don't know if Alana would love to read it in English, the translation. Would you like that?
I'm happy to read it in English, Briar, but I think you should.
Okay, I'll. مطبخ الصديقة. جدار اللغة لم يكن فاصلا في مطبخ الصديقة. في مطبخ الصديقة موقد الجسم أشعله الليل، كأس الشاي وإبريق النبيذ، التعاطف الفذ مع الطفولة العاطفة، المكان الغريب، الاسم الغريب، والضحكة المستثارة من غربة الصوت، والشمعة على حافة البانيو تستعطف ألسنة الوجد والرائحة، ثم أيقونة نادرة تحت نادرة النحت قرب العنق، ثم العنق، ثم الإبط والسرة، ثم ما تعتنق الروح بلا ترجمان، جدار اللغة والكلمات العاطلة، جدار اللغة والكلمات العاطلة ليلتها، ثم مجمرة الوصل والأدعية. A friend's kitchen. The wall of language was no barrier in a friend's kitchen. In a friend's kitchen, night lit up the body stove, teacup and wine jug. An uncommon love, even as a fledgling. A strange place, a strange name. Laughter provoked the strangeness of the sounds, and the candle on the bathtub's edge, wooing tongues of flame and fragrance. Atop her neck, a sculptured icon with no equal, and her neck unequaled, and her armpit, her navel unequaled, and my spirit's conversation needing no translator, unequaled. The wall of language, and that night's idle words before the processions of the censer with its priors. Yes.
Gorgeous, Briar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we beg for one more?
Another poem, or
Yeah.
yes, yeah. So of Al Sadiq, or the ones that.
Whatever you have prepared, Briar. We're excited to hear whatever you have.
So this is also David poem that I talked about that meant a lot to me at that time. It's called Let Me Explain, that is inspired by Pablo Neruda. And it said, let me explain. And it's written in response to the drone attacks in Pakistan at that time. And basically it is the same kind of attacks that happened in Koya with drones again. And I translated it into Sorani. Let me explain. After Neruda, go ahead, ask, where are the pomegranates, the dates, the girls with skin brown as hash, the hash? Listen to what's happening. One morning, bonfires began to leap from the earth, devouring human beings, lit up by matches, flicked across the sky with joysticks. And from then on, fire, from then on, burning hair, from then on, limbs and meat, invisible bandits, pickpockets from 10,000 feet, faceless, thoughtless, dumb except for humming. Bandits marked within tiny flags, controlled from continents away by children. Child bandits with leather jackets left hanging in their girlfriend's closet. Child bandits with Bibles thumbed and highlighted, spear missile through the sky to kill other children. And the blood of children runs through the streets, neither seen nor heard, obedient, simply like children's blood. Ask away, why doesn't this poetry describe our urban loneliness? The body drenched in metaphor. There is nothing to see here, nothing to see. Just blood in the sand, blood in the streets, nothing to see. ڕوونکردنەوە بپرسە لە شوێن هەنارەکان خورماکان ئەو کچانەی پێستیان وەک حەشیش قاوەیە بپرسە حەشیش خۆی لەکوێیە گوێ هەڵبخە بزانە چی ڕوودەدا بڵێسەی ئاگری بەیانیەک لە زەویەوە بۆ هەڵوشینی مرۆڤ بەرز بووە بە دەستێک کە دەنگەشقارتەیەکی لە ئاسمان خشاند لەو کاتەوە ئاگر لەو کاتەوە قژی هەڵپڕووزا و لەو کاتەوە ئەندام و گۆشت باند و گیرفانبڕی نادیار لە 10,000 پێدوورەوە بێ ڕوخسار بێبیر بێزمان تەنها دەنگدانەوەیەک باندێک لە منداڵان باندێک کە بە ئاڵا بچووکەکانیاندا دەناسرێنەوە کە جلی خوێندنگەیان هێشتا لە کانتۆری هاوڕێکچەکانیانە هەڵواسراوە لە دووری چەند کیشوەرێکەوە باندەکانی تر کۆنتڕۆڵ دەکەن باندی منداڵەکان بە ئینجیلێکی هێڵ بە شێردا هاتوو موشک بە ئاسماندا هەڵدەدەن بۆ کوشتنی منداڵانی تر خوێنی منداڵ بە شەقامەکاندا جۆگەڵە دەبەستێت نەبینراو نەبیستراو ژێڕایەڵ زۆر سادە وەک خوێنی منداڵان دیسان بپرسە بۆچی شێعرەکانی باسی لە تەنیایی ژیانی شار باسی لەو جەستەیی لە میتافۆردا خوساوە ناکەن لێرە هیچ نییە بۆ بینین هیچ نییە جگە لە لمی خوێناوی و شەقامی خوێناوی. And we recited this poem also, as said, in Amna Suraka, and this amazing collaborative work where like everyone gathered there, and there comes like Mr. Rusher Ali, who's one of Kashkool friends, who gave like last edits to this work, and so I appreciate his edits in the last minutes of the reading. I can't hear
Sorry,
you.
I believe you've prepared something else, haven't you,
Yes, yeah.
Briar?
And so this is in Exeter. So I started writing poetry. I wrote this on my own. I started writing poetry in Exeter, um, um, where I was very much alone because my wife's visa application was delayed and rejected because they were not convinced that we are married and all this stuff. And 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 at that time a lot of events happened, like the Turkish offensive on Rojava, and my wife just went through that same experience of violence in her life. So I wasn't there to help her or to support her. I knew that this is gonna bring the trauma back, and I was here alone and couldn't do anything, just waiting. So I wrote this poem here in Exeter. Decision. You have applied to join your spouse, Briar Bahadin Muhammad Nouri Bajalan, who is Tier 4 General Student in the UK. As evidence of your relationship, you have provided a marriage certificate dated 23rd June 2017. However, you have not provided any other evidence of your relationship. The fact that you demonstrated your marriage took place doesn't act as an independent corroboration of you are in a subsistence relationship, and the evidence you have provided is insufficient. I therefore am not satisfied that your relationship is subsisting, that you intend to live with your sponsor throughout their stay in the UK, or that you do not intend to stay in the UK beyond. McDonald's. Standing waiting for my sandwich. McDonald's packed with people. Children excited for Happy Meals. Toys, burgers, fries, and apple slices. They better be quick. Delivery number 181. Guest number 181, please. 181. No answer. My thoughts take me home. What if our delivery get delayed too? Giving us a few extra minutes of life. Generous. A moment to take a last sniff. A moment for a goodbye kiss. A moment for the last lick of the lollipop. A moment to give Barbie one last stylish look. A moment to allow God to finish his last sip of champagne and watch as he crushes us like junk food. This is what God does. Just watch. He never tried his own hell even once. Just watch. The delivery guy quickly collected what he got. Phosphorus meals in purple cone-shaped shields. The ketchup packets crying, release the flame. Delivery dropped heavy meals for kids. And one of the events that I really appreciate that in Exeter that is when all these turbulent events happened in Iraq, Syria, in Kurdistan, and Lebanon. Professor Katie Nathaniel, one of the Institute of Arabic and Islamic Studies staff members, just made an event for a collaboration of reflections on these turbulent that recently happened, and it was an opportunity for staff and students to come together and provided a space for dialogue to share our stories, to learn from each other and support each other in times of fear and hope at the same time. And also in the Professor Clemens invited me in the Exeter Literary Festival to recite this poem, and Christine was there to So I participated in the resistance, the poetics of resistance in Kurdish poetry, in the literally festival in Exeter. And that was very sweet of the University of Exeter.
I'm not sure we were being sweet. I think we knew a good, I think that Clemence knew a good event when she saw one, really, and she knew that you would do a great job, to be honest. I think that we've got a few questions building up on the chat and on the Q&A, and I was wondering if we should start those. Marie, shall we turn to the questions from the attenders?
I think that sounds wonderful, Christine.
Okay, do you have any thoughts of who to start with? I think that let's have a look.
We could go in order we received them, or I think that might be fine.
It could be. Okay. There's quite a lot of them. I'm sort of scrolling through them. Yes. So Mohammed Fatih asked the question: what are the challenges that you face, Briar, while you're translating from Arabic to English? And what method do you use to incorporate translation into your research?
Thank you, Hava, for this question. And one of the difficult things in Arabic translation is that Arabic language is an impure language where there isn't the diacritics in Arabic language is not written, and this becomes difficult where you translate from classical work, because when you try to compensate for the stylistic and language change over time, then you really need these diacritics to understand what these poets might try to convey. And this is like one of the really biggest challenge. So the way to work on that is just studying a lot of secondary sources and archives to just know who is the poet and understand what they mean, what they try to convey.
Yeah.
And Briar is sort of a follow-up question to that, rolling Hama's second question in with Laja's question as well. I think we're all interested in how the experience of studying at Exeter has helped you frame your own research that you've conducted in Iraq. And also, I'm just more generally, how has it helped you grow as a researcher? Where has your research gone from where you were when you were in Iraq and Kurdistan to now being in Exeter and starting your PhD? I think we're all interested in that.
This is a very interesting question because, my research developed in just a meeting that we had with Iraqi culture expert and an Iraqi poet. And basically they talked about Az-Zahawi and his work as superfluous to the history of development of Iraqi poetry, and that his work is full of unnecessary verbal acrobatics or something like that. And I always, like, this conversation was always in my mind. I couldn't answer them at that time. And when I came to Exeter, and I was always reading about this and trying to find an answer for that, why they don't enjoy the 19th century Iraqi poetry, and why they think that it's not modern. And one of the important things in Exeter is just like when you go on in the lounge, you speak with all these scholars who share the same table with you. And one of the scholars that very much, my work is very much influenced by her, is Dr. Ferengis Qadri, who's kind of like doing a very similar work on Kurdish poetry. And this phenomena is not just on, it didn't just happen to Iraqi Arabic poetry, but to Kurdish poetry and Persian poetry too. And the method that she used, like she used Lotman theory to tackle this issue and understand how modern Kurdish poetry became modern. And basically, I had a lot of benefit from that. And one of the great things that my supervisor, Tina Phillips, provided to me is like relating this work to major works in the field in general. And one of the great things that she did is like, she's one of those professors that don't give you straight answers, but challenge your thought. And this is the professor that I really like. It's like they challenge your thinking, and yeah, so they ask you to find the solution and go, they give you the help, but they let you do the research. And I really appreciate that thing. And basically, I've gone through really difficult time at that time, as one of my friends in Baghdad, Dr. Hisham al-Hashimi, was assassinated just right at that time that I was writing my dissertation. And Dr. Tina Phillips provided like a lot of scholar help and a lot of emotional help too. And she's basically like a really great friend, you know, every time we chat about modern art, and she still owes me an invitation to the Tat museum in London, but we couldn't go because of the COVID.
We'll remind her of that.
Yeah.
Yes.
I hope this is a good reminder.
Yes, yes. Yeah, she's great. My teenage son once said, "Oh, are you going to invite her to our house? She's got swag." So yes, and also I'm glad that you mentioned Ferangis's work, because Dr. Ferengis Qadri has got a book in preparation, and it really does shift the paradigms on Kurdish literature, because it explains modernization of Kurdish poetry, you know, as a process rather than just an arrival all at once. She shows how it happens, and yeah, it's going to be great.
The metaphor she's used with me in the past is that modernism is a wave, and the beginning of the wave, we all look at the peak of the wave and think that's the moment, but the wave built over the course of a century. And I've always thought that was a particularly astute metaphor.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
This same happened in Iraqi poetry. Like even when they asked Nazik al-Malaika, as they claim she's the inventor of free verse poetry, when they said to her, like, who invented the free verse poetry? And she said, free verse poetry was just a ready fruit that me and Badr Shakir Sayyab grabbed it, and it was ready to harvest. So if it wasn't me or it wasn't Badr Shakir Sayyab, someone else would invent it because it was ready.
Yeah.
Well, Christine, we have a wonderful question from an anonymous attendee, and then we have some questions lined up from Alan and Asha that I think would work well to come next. Where'd you like to go?
Well, I was actually wondering about leading into Asha's question about how important do you think the arts and literature are in the field of Kurdish studies and Kurdish culture in general? Do they play a big role in claiming agency and amplifying othered voices, similar to fields of post-colonial arts and literature?
Of course, like poetry is everything for Kurds. And you know, during times of and poetry itself is resistance for Kurds. You know, writing poetry, preserving poetry, and a lot of people who left their own cities in forced Arabization, of forced resettlements, or just running away from a genocidal campaign. There was a lot of people who took their own books with themselves and preserved it, and just preserving these I don't know, these works is an act of resistance. And the name of Kashkool is one of the things that Kurds use as a resistance. Is Kashkool, like it has different meanings, but one of the meanings is that it's the collection of book that is made of taking one pages of like important pages of any books of your library, and then you collect a library in a summary book. This is like one of the kashkols that people use, so that they can carry it with themselves as they flee from their cities or something like that. So they have like a minimum library, and of course poetry is definitely an act of resistance for Kurds, and even translation was, because a lot of Kurdish artists and translators, poets, were translators of Neruda and many other poets too, into Kurdish.
Thank you. Marie, would you like to pose the next question?
Yes, we have this question from Asha as well. She says, thank you so much, Briar, for sharing your profound experiences. As someone who also grew up in war and has too many memories of death and bombs, my question is, how do you deal with the painful past that nonetheless made you the person you are today? And how does that past inform your work?
That is a difficult question.
It's a big one.
And past.
I mean, we've been talking a little bit about that the whole time, but it's the most direct
Yes.
we've asked you for.
I think Asha's put her finger on it, really.
Yes, she really has.
I don't know, but I feel I'm standing on the past, and all these stories made me today. And I think the better way to say it is, I don't know. It's a difficult question.
Maybe we could talk a little bit about Mosul Lives, Briar, here, because this it might be easier to talk about, to answer Asha's question with a specific project. Yeah. Maybe you could talk about, I mean, when we started Mosul Lives, we called it Mosul Remembered. And then at one point we came home, we were doing these long field days, driving all over Mosul province. The city was still half held by ISIS. We were going into IDP camps and unofficial IDP camps for Christians who were fleeing the violence, and also the city itself, wherever we could find people who would talk with us, who could take the time. And we came back from one of these field days, and you, me, and Elizabeth, we sat down and we said, we can't call it Mosul Remembered. It must be Mosul Lives. We have to change the name of the project. And I remember that as a moment of you, of a real contribution of yours, reframing the project really from a theoretical standpoint, but also from clearly something that you understood within yourself about the nature of dislocation, the nature of destruction, but also really the nature of creation and the nature of resilience. So maybe you could talk about maybe it's a little easier to talk about the resilience and creation you saw in Mosul, maybe it's a little easier to talk about that.
Yeah.
I hope Asha will forgive us for reframing her question.
Yeah, I agree, because one of the most important things, like when we went to Mosul, everything was destroyed, and there was like this thick smoke on the air. And I don't know if you remember, we stayed, we stopped at in front of the Nino Opera Hotel, which I have like a very personal story with that. So my parents were both they both studied at Mosul University, and their love story started in Mosul, and they spent their honeymoon in that hotel, the Nino Opera Hotel. And once we grew up, they wanted to re-celebrate that memory, and they took me and my brother into that hotel again. And I remember when I went there into that hotel, I still remember how much I was afraid of the automatic door, because I have never seen any of it in Iraq. And the nice swimming pools, the palm trees, the gardens, like really nice hotel. And when we went there, the windows were broken, the curtains were swaying, the doors slammed shut, the gardens were full of bobby traps, the pool was full of dirt and all this stuff, and I saw a lot of researchers going there and writing stories about Mosul and radicalization and terrorism and all the news about the war. But like when I thought about it, like, this is not the Mosul I once know. There must be another story of Mosul. And one of the things that I also like learned here in Exeter, like in my anthropology classes, is this like kind of developing theoretical metonymy, as Leila Abouloghot calls it, is like defining or limiting the scholarship, or theorizing in the region to dominant, or and define it into dominant and stereotypical questions of interest in the region. And I was worried about the love stories basically in Mosul, and when we went there, we basically were worried too about how people might react when we talk about Mosul before ISIS, before the Islamic State, and before all this destruction. But like, people talked about the love stories. I remember one guy who said like, I couldn't go every week to visit my future wife, like when they were engaged. So he decided to hire a carriage driven horse to visit her every week from the village to Mosul. And this is the stories of the stories from Mosul. And my particular research in Mosul now kind of helps the people of Mosul to battle and claim for like a specific part of their identity, which is how they make love and how they love each other. And this is just a very simple part of their identity that is unfortunately now stolen. So it is great intervention into the politics of representation of the city.
Yeah, I remember that day we saw the hotel. It was also the day that we went to a concert in the Mosul forest. That was the first time young people had played, and it was all young people. And it was the first time music had been out in the air in Mosul since the end of the occupation of the Islamic State of the city. And I remember how touched you were that day. I think that day we also went to a wedding
Yes.
in Mosul on the banks of the river. And so I remember thinking that your parents had made Mosul a city of love and literature for you, and that you were very committed to it as a city of love and literature, which I respect and admire.
We have another question from Valeria. With poetry as an act of resistance, one can see how words are used by Kurdish poets to assert the community voice against outside oppression. But are you able to comment, Briar, on the use of poetry or words to resist internal oppressions, for example, regarding gender or intergenerational conflict?
I think we do have a lot of Kurdish poets. I think Lana knows more about that too. Like Kashal Ahmed, who and Shoman Hardi, who wrote, I think, a lot of poems in about internal oppression too, and gender oppression and all this stuff. I'm not expert on Kurdish poetry, and so I don't know if I would be the right person to. So it's true that so my studies is about Arabic Iraqi poetry, but that is from my story as a Kurd. But I'm not the. Yeah, I think Alana would.
Well, maybe I could ask Alana Marie, because I know that you have translated quite a lot of poetry from Kurdish women poets, and perhaps you could say a word to speak to that question.
Sure. And I also think, Briar, this could relate, maybe you can, as I'll cobble together a little bit of an answer for that for Valeria, but maybe this relates a bit to the question Alan asked as well, about how his question basically centered on the idea that the attacks in Koya, the Peshmerga who were there were exiled Rojavati Kurds, and how the attack might have affected them being in some ways a minority within a minority. Dislocated within, I mean, in a sense it's home, but in a much bigger sense it's not. And how that bombing might have affected that community as sort of insider outsiders. I think this idea of poetry and art as resisting internal oppression really relates to Alan's question as well. So maybe, Briar, I'll give you 45 seconds to think about that and attempt an answer for Valeria. Does that sound fair?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. One of the things I think is most interesting about contemporary Kurdish poetry is the move away from state-sponsored poetry. So if you look at the 19th century, Valeria, you've got the Babans and the Ardalans, sort of the last moments of those, the last decades of those principalities, supporting massive rosters of poets. So, we have accounts of 400 poets at the court. Nali being the king of poets, and then Piramed writes that Nali threw the crown away from his head, because how can a Kurdish poet be a king of poets when they don't have a king? When the king has no crown, the king of poets has no crown. And that the end of those two principalities ushered in a long period where Kurdish poetry was really a mode of survival, a mode of transmitting history, a mode of transmitting values, transmitting the language itself, and definitely a world of resisting the internal oppression that Zaidan talked about last week. Forced Arabization not just being a physical relocation, but a mental dislocation, an imaginative dissociation. And poetry can really resist that in ways that external forces have a hard time interrupting or touching. I think that's what we see. That's what we see really from the first decades of the 19th century into the 1970s, 70s and 80s, where Kurdish poetry once again becomes a state-sponsored activity, not in a negative, underhanded way, but in the idea that everyone was in the mountains, everyone was fighting, and poets were part of the fight. Radio operators were part of the fight. Newspapermen were part of the fight. And when the sort of resistance became the governance, all of those poets and artists who had been in the mountains part of the resistance became part of the governance. Those poets are now really changing. Rather than being champions of the resistance or champions of the governance, they're now really refinding their voices as champions of people. So if you look at, Sarwar mentioned Venus Fayek, Sara Ibrahim, obviously Kajal Ahmed and Shoman Hardi are very, very loud voices. But also, and I mean loud in a good way, but I also would mention, Hero Kurda, Trifadowski. There are so many women out there right now using poetry, not just to criticize the governance or be in conversation with the governance or the resistance, but also to be helping people think about those modes of internal change, what an individual wants to become, what an individual can become, and how that individual can open possibilities to the larger community that may take a great long time to realize. So Hera Kurda, for instance, is famous for her intimate, erotic fight, which is very different from the fight that Kajal Ahmed made in her poetry, which is a much more public fight, still about the body, but a much more public fight about body as territory. So I think Valeria, I think it's changing quite a lot. And we're witnessing another really interesting moment, changing from the state-sponsored poetry of the 1970s, 80s, and 90s into a much more independent, internal, as you say, struggle. So I think we're in an interesting moment in Kurdish poetry for sure. Briar, did I give you enough time?
Yes. I think one of the very interesting thing is of course, the Roshalati community in Koya is living now in camps for, I don't call it camps anymore. It became homes for them because they have lived there for a while now, from the early 80s, and they've been there stateless without any identification, and a lot of people use their vulnerable social position, including my wife and many people who can't even ride taxis because of the fear that they might be sexually harassed in Kurdistan because of their vulnerable situation, because they don't have IDs or anything, and they are under oppression all the time and very underrepresented in everything in Kurdistan. And one of the ways that is very meaningful to me, way of their resistance and how it is related to poetry, is their graveyards. All their graveyards, you can see poetry engraved on these graveyards. With everyone dying in that community, there is a poem that is written and laid on a grave. And it's mostly most of these poems are resistant poems. So when someone dies, they take poems with them. So I think this is very powerful. And it is basically unusual in the region, because if you go in most of the graveyards, they write Islamic verses of the Quran or anything like that. This is the tradition, but I think writing poetry on the graves is very much an act of resistance, I think.
Thank you. You used your 45 seconds wisely. That was really interesting.
Thank you.
Marie, I think we do need to draw to a close soon. Are there any more questions that you think we need to address before we thank our wonderful guest?
I was just, Hodaya Halwachi just had a lovely question to end on, I think, asking, do you have any future projects, Briar, working on war, trauma, and stories, war trauma stories and poetry in the northern cities of Iraq, including Mosul?
Yes.
And Huda, what a lovely question to end on.
Yes, I think one of the things that I'm thinking about is recently is doing a poetry film in that area, in the graveyards, and show these poems, and first translate them and do a poetry film. This is one of the projects that I'm looking forward to do it. And of course, writing my PhD about Mosul, about love stories in Mosul.
Thank you.
I'm a little worried that video will bring us all to our knees, Briar, but we are ready to be slayed by it.
Thank you.
So I think now we must draw to a close. Thank you so much for all the wonderful questions and comments from those who've attended. And if you know anybody who's missed this, don't forget to tell them they can catch up with it on the AUIS YouTube channel, and soon on the Exeter YouTube channel, as soon as we upload it onto that. So they won't have missed it. But now I'd like to thank Briar so much for, I think one of the reasons everybody loves you so much is you give so much of yourself always. You always give so much love and people just give it back to you. So thank you for bringing your love to us today. And yes, it's been really wonderful to hear you read and to hear you talk and to share this time with you. So thank you very much. Marie, would you like to say anything about our next session?
Sure. Next week, we'll be speaking with Hari Khalid. He's a wonderful photographer who's worked all over Iraq, and will be speaking with us about conflict photography. He's covered I'm trying to be humble for him, but I'm not going to be humble for him. I'm going to brag about him. He has covered every single major conflict of the last 10 years. He's been on the front lines of all of those conflicts, dedicating himself to telling those stories, but also telling many other stories from Iraq that go far beyond conflict into things like death metal bands and ballet troupes and symphonies. So I'm very excited to have Hari join us, and I hope you will all join us too. And that will be 2 weeks from today.
Thank you. Thank you, Marie. And thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, all of you. Thank you, Briar.
Thank you. أهلي دل.
دخوا حافظ.